Okay, everyone, I wanted to give the demonstration for week 3's Photoshop techniques. This week we're looking at what's called photocompositing, which means combining multiple photographs into a single composition. So if you think about the word composite, what does it mean? It means something made up of multiple parts. And you can use this technique to create a collage or to add an object or a person, or in this case a duck, into a different scene or a different photograph. The assignment for this week's practice is to insert a duck into different scenes from around the world. This is called the traveling duck exercise, and this is something you can have fun with. It's meant to be silly, but at the same time, it's letting you practice these photocompositing techniques. So I'm going to start off with this my location photograph, and this is the beach in Hawaii. It's a very lovely tropical setting. So now I need to add my traveling duck, and the idea is that we're creating sort of a travel postcard, kind of a wish you were here kind of thing, that the duck might send back to its family or its friends. So I've got this scene, now I need a duck. The Linda lesson shows you a few ways to add the extra elements into your photo. There's many ways you can go about this. They might talk about using bridge. Personally, I don't use bridge, mostly because when I learned Photoshop, it didn't exist, so I just never got in the habit of it. It's very useful, so I do encourage you to explore it. But the simplest and most direct way to get the duck, or whatever you're working with in other cases, onto this photograph is to simply drag it from my folder and drop it right onto the beach. So now it appears, and it is in a sort of a temporary state right now. You see that X on it, and that's basically asking you to decide if you really want to add this photo. If I was to click the reject button up here, it would go away. It would just be deleted, like it was never added. But in this case, I'm pretty happy with this, so I'm going to commit to this transform, hit the check mark, and it just becomes a new layer. So that element is added to a new layer on the document. Clearly, there's a lot of stuff left that I don't really want to include here. So I'm going to look at ways to get rid of all this excess and just leave the duck and make it look like he is actually at this beach. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to make him a little bit larger in the scene. And I'm going to do that by using the free transform feature, which is under Edit and Transform. No, it's under Edit and Free Transform. The quick way to do that, though, is to hit Command T, and anything that's on that layer will be selected and will be modifiable. And you can use these handles to stretch it and distort it. If you hold Shift while you move that, it'll keep its proportions. So you see all the length and height are staying consistent. And I can make him a little larger without really distorting his proportions. And again, once you are satisfied with the changes, you can click the check mark, or you can just double click the image itself and it will accept. Alright, so beach, duck, each on there are separate layers, but the beach is pretty well hidden by the rest of the duck's photo, and we want to get rid of that. Again, this is called non-destructive editing because we don't really destroy, we don't erase any of this original image, we just hide the parts we don't want. So that way if we change our minds, want to do things differently, we can easily undo it. So we're going to start, much like we did last week, with the color correction, and we're going to start with a selection. Basically, the start to any photo manipulation is going to be the selection. So using the quick selection tool, and I'm going to make sure I have auto enhance still selected so that it refines my selection automatically. I'm just going to start selecting my duck. And this particular duck has such great definition because of his white color that all the lines are really clearly defined, and that allows me to easily grab that selection. And I'm zooming in to see the fine details, and the reason being that if you look, you see there's sort of a green outline right there. That's part of the background that's being left. And so I want to get in here and again refine that selection. So I'm holding the Option key while I'm using the quick selection tool, and then I'm just going to sort of go back and forth trying to get rid of as much of that as I can, subtracting and adding to the selection. And it's kind of snapping back because I have that refine selection or auto enhance feature picked. It's trying to help me out. In this case, it's kind of being a little bit counterproductive, but I have gotten rid of some of that because I don't want that left once I add the layer mask. This is being problematic. You see these little pixels sticking up here. I want to get rid of those, so I'm going to go ahead and use the rectangle selection tool, holding Option, so that means subtracting, and just sort of brute force that. I just want that to go away. It's not cooperating with the quick selection. So sometimes you do have to switch between different selection tools until you get it just right. Okay, and I'm zoomed way in. I'm going to go back to 100%. That's under the View menu. I've got my selection where I want it. So in order to hide all this stuff, I will apply what's called a layer mask, and that's found on the layer panel right next to the adjustment layer button that we used last week. There's the layer mask button. If I hit this, it's going to hide everything except what I have selected on this layer. So it only affects that layer, but it will hide all the stuff outside of that selection, leaving just our duck. So it's like magic. And you can see right here that green outline that I was talking about. That's because there was part of that that was not selected. I actually double clicked on my layer mask and it gave me some options. And I was just kind of seeing if I could feather that. Feathering means kind of making the edge a little blurry. But it doesn't seem to be having any effect. So a simple solution in this case could be just to slide your duck over so that that part is just gone. It's hidden. Of course, the responsible thing would be to keep working on your selection until you get it just right. For the sake of time, I'm just going to make him bigger and try to hide him away. Now I could zoom in really close, and I can get really close and use my eraser tool and take away some of this unwanted stuff. So it's getting rid of some of that. This takes a lot of finesse because you don't want to accidentally erase a big swath of your poor duck's head. Just go right along the edge. By the way, I don't use a mouse. I'm actually just using the trackpad because I really want this to be authentic to the equipment you have. So just kind of over time you'll build your coordination with your trackpad skills and be able to do some more detailed work. But I don't discourage using a mouse if you have one available. Sometimes they can be much more precise, or even a graphics tablet if you have the money to spend. Ooh, that's a really heavy green right there. You see that? So I'm just going to take that away because that will really stand out against that water in the background. And it will be obvious. And you don't want to have any obvious giveaways that you have done a photo manipulation in this case. Sometimes you don't care if it's obvious because you want it to look like kind of some very crude and rough artwork, like an old school poster or something. But in this case, we're going for believability. So that looks pretty decent. That looks not bad at all. We put our duck into our beach scene. Okay, so with the layer mask, so the only thing left at this point would be to add some text and make this into some kind of meaningful message. Since we're going with a postcard theme, I'm going to keep it fairly simple and just sort of take sort of a travel poster approach. We use white text and type Maui with an exclamation point. I really would like that to be larger because we want to emphasize the locations. That's way too big for our purpose, since I also want it to appear actually on on screen and be readable. So 36 looks pretty good. And I can just position that. And add another little piece of text. I'm going to say beautiful. Make this much smaller. I'm going to go, let's see how big 18 now. I'm going to go smaller than that. Let's go down to 12. So that's beautiful Maui, and put it in a logical position next to the title. So now we have sort of this travel poster or endorsement for visiting Maui. I would really like this text to be a little more striking, a little more attention-getting, and exciting. So what I'm going to do, and this is something that takes some practice to get used to, I'm going to use the text distort or warped text feature. I advise you to use this very sparingly because it can be used too much and can create some very tacky looking effects until you get the hang of it. You see there's different shapes you can select. Arc is the most basic and it just creates arched text. It just distorted it in sort of a bent semicircle. You can control how much this spins. And so I just want this a little bit bent. So I'm just going to go for 10%. And you can also do the horizontal, which you see has different distortion effects. And I actually am going to drop that down to about 40. And vertical. So if you think about like funhouse mirrors, it's kind of like looking at the text through one of those, and the vertical distortion warps the mirror outward in the vertical, horizontal warps the mirror horizontally, so it changes the shape based on those ideas. Okay, so I made this distorted almost to where it looks like it's zooming, like there's sort of an arch. It gives it a little bit of a sense of action, doesn't it? I'm going to use, again, my free transform tool because I don't really like the positioning of this. And since I've got this nice arc, I'm going to rotate this. And that's another thing you can do with free transform is go to the corners and rotate freely. Okay, so that's kind of neat. I'm going to drop the size of the word beautiful down a little bit more so I can squeeze it into this little wedge of space available up here. All right, so that's looking pretty good. The white is repeated from the duck as well as the sea foam. Again, I really want this to be striking, kind of visually striking, so I'm going to use that same drop shadow effect I showed last week. A few of you have been using this to create outlines for your text. And I have white selected. White drop shadow doesn't really show up. If I have black, and you put the distance to 0, spread to 100%, and then the size between, say, 2 and 6. I'm going to keep it at 3. Then you see it creates that nice outline, solid outline. But I don't want that to be black. And you can actually create drop shadows in any color you want. So it's not just a believable shadow, like a natural shadow. It can be, in this case, a red shadow and therefore a red outline. So that looks pretty dynamic, pretty exciting. And just to allow the word beautiful to stand out a little more, I'm actually just gonna make it red in its entirety. So now you've got a little bit of a consistent color scheme. You've got a traveling duck. You've got the background, like this beautiful scene available. Let's see what we can do with the word beautiful as well. I'm just going to kind of give some contrast by making this drop shadow white. And putting it down to 2 pixels is fine. So now it's the same color scheme as the word Maui, but just kind of inverted. Okay, so that's really it. That's the assignment. Think about your visual hierarchy, and I want to comment on visual hierarchy just a bit, and then we'll wrap up. But a visual hierarchy, think about what a hierarchy is. It's the organization. It's the ranking of importance or authority. So, in an organizational hierarchy, the president or the CEO is at the top, and then below them would be the vice presidents and other senior officers, followed by middle management, and then the worker bees. So that's a organizational hierarchy. Then a visual hierarchy would be that element of the design that grabs your attention first, that is just obviously more emphasized, more important to the message of the media. So in this case, probably the top item on the visual hierarchy would be the duck. He's pretty big, he's white, so he stands out. It's kind of a close call though, because Maui, the way I created it, is very exciting looking and also has a bright red border, so it could be said to be the top of the visual hierarchy. And then, like all hierarchies, it goes down in steps. So it could be the duck is the top of the hierarchy, followed by the word Maui, followed by beautiful, and then the beach scene. I might say the beach scene is higher on the hierarchy than beautiful, just where the emphasis is given. And that's a decision that you have to make. Looking at your book covers from the exploration, notice that the publisher will sometimes decide to make the title bigger. That's especially true if it's a new author or a popular title. But sometimes they will emphasize the author's name instead. Give that larger billing, because some authors are really well known. Think about Elizabeth Gilbert or Stephen King or any number of popular authors. Sometimes people will be looking for that name instead of a specific book title when they decide what they want to read. So in those cases, the publisher will decide to go with the author's name as the highest part of the visual hierarchy because that's what's going to get attention. That's what's going to attract readers. So anyway, in any design that you do, regardless of whether it's a book cover or a postcard or a commercial or your layout of your personal website, you decide what the visual hierarchy will be, what you want to emphasize. You decide what's most important in telling the story that you're trying to tell or communicate the message that you're trying to communicate. And then do the edits to reflect that. So the beach here is important. So I want that to be visible. I don't want to cover it up. I want to make sure you have a good view of those trees and that shoreline and everything. So I've done that by putting the duck off to the side. He's more dominant, so he catches your eye first, but he does not obscure the rest of the scene. So let's talk really quick, just finally, about saving your work. This has multiple layers, and if I saved my work, if I just said save as or save, it's going to try to save this as a PSD file. And that's a Photoshop document file. That is not a viable image form. That is simply saving your work for you to work on later. I'm just going to call this Maui. And it's a good idea to save your PSD file because you might want to return to some of these projects later and do some more edits. But in order to finish and finalize your work, you have to save it as an image file, and that's a JPEG or a PNG, sometimes a GIF or GIF, but rarely will you use GIFs. So go back into the Save As, and then scroll down this is the Format drop-down, and just pick JPEG. So now it's maui.jpg, and you can save it, and it gives you some questions. You can generally just say OK to this. So the layers are still there, and this is in your PSD file. But if I went to my actual files, and it should appear here. There's Maui, maui.jpg, JPEG, and there's maui.psd. If I clicked on that, it would open in Preview, and it does not have multiple layers. That's only the PSD. A JPEG does not have layers, but it's our finished image, and this is what you will be turning in to me for your practice activity as well as for your mood board. So not bad, pretty quick and dirty and pretty rough, but again, this is our goal here is strictly to get the basics, to learn the basic skills of Photoshop. From there, it's a matter of figuring out what to do with them, and that's where principles of composition and graphic design come into play. Alright, so hopefully this has been helpful and hopefully it's enjoyable. I look forward to seeing what you all come up with, and I encourage you to really just have fun with this. Make me laugh. If your project gives me a chuckle, then all the better. Alright, I'll talk to you guys later.